Here, nature isolates everything, yet the people have built a society so tightly knit that no one has to face it alone. This is Norway. This video won't dwell on the beauty of the fjords or the glow of the northern lights. Instead, it's a realistic look at daily life here, how people build families, commute, work, earn a living, and hold their communities together through months of Arctic darkness. Behind the calm lie sharp paradoxes, a country chasing a green transition, yet fueled by massive oil profits. Isolated villages with high-speed fiber internet, yet slowly running out of young people. A society that fiercely guards personal privacy, yet runs on a foundation of shared responsibility. A landscape that offers an ideal quality of life, yet is always ready to whip up storms that cut off traffic for days. So how did a nation divided by mountains, seas, and months of darkness build one of the most stable ways of life in Europe? And as climate change knocks on the door, young people leave home, and oil revenues run dry, how much must Norway change to protect that very way of life? To understand how this life was built, we first have to understand the land that forced people to live by nature's rules. On the map, Norway is a long, narrow strip of land, its coastline shattered into tens of thousands of fjords, islands, and straits. Giant mountains plunge straight into the water. Here, distance on paper means little. A few dozen kilometers can mean hours of winding mountain roads or a long wait for a ferry. This is the legacy of the Ice Age. Ancient glaciers carved deep valleys through the bedrock before the sea rushed in to form the fjords. Those fjords give rich resources, but they are also a great dividing wall. Most communities could take root only on the rare strips of land flat enough to build and farm. Light and seasons rule daily life just as firmly. In the north, summer brings endless days when the sun never sets, while winter sinks into long stretches of darkness. This rhythm of light and dark is no tourist attraction. It governs working hours, routines, moods, and every outdoor plan. Here, the weather is an active participant. It decides whether the ferry runs, whether fishing boats may leave, whether mountain passes close, whether goods arrive on time, and whether a medical appointment happens at all. There is a familiar saying, "There is no bad weather, only bad clothing." That is not a cheerful slogan, it is a survival philosophy. Instead of demanding that nature serve them, people prepare, adapt, and respect its limits. But geography only truly matters when you watch a family move through an ordinary day inside it. The kitchen light comes on. The weather forecast murmurs, mixing with the wind outside the window. Layers of cold weather clothing are laid out. A car starts in the dark, and the first ferry of the day cuts through the waves and leaves the dock. Children set off for school, bundled in layers by bus, by ferry across a fjord, or in the family car. Learning doesn't stay within four walls. From an early age, Children spend time outdoors, growing used to the harsh climate, building independence and a quiet sense of safety with every steady step on the deep snow. At the same time, adults step into the rhythm of work. The workplaces are varied downtown offices, coastal factories and seafood plants, fishing boats far out at sea, hospitals, harbors, or a remote desk in a tiny community. At noon comes Matpakke, simple, open-faced sandwiches made at home, a world away from the lavish cuisine tourism loves to show. It speaks of practicality, efficiency, and an organized working day. Goods, too, are always on the move. Fish may come from nearby waters, but fruit and vegetables travel a very long way. Trucks, ferries, and cold storage form an invisible chain, feeding the shelves and shaping the higher prices of remote communities. Healthcare must bend to a harsh reality. Where is the nearest hospital? If the weather turns, how does a patient travel? Emergency services adapt to fjords, islands, and mountain passes, and the elderly in the emptiest regions are still cared for with real devotion. As work ends, the rest of the day belongs to private life. Parents collect their children, buy groceries, and head home. Some go out to ski, hike, or train. This is not just personal habit, it is a shared cultural and institutional model. Dinner comes early. The family gathers. Warm candlelight, the smell of coffee, the sounds of cooking or handiwork create a state of kos. Kos is not interior design. It is how people actively build inner calm while it is cold, dark, and unpredictable outside. In winter, life turns inward, and the light of a house becomes a sign of safety. In summer, everything moves outdoors, as harbors and trails come alive to seize the long daylight. A day like this seems effortlessly ordered. But what makes millions of people trust that the schools, ferries, hospitals, and communities will always be there when they are needed? The visible structures are only half the answer. The rest is an invisible system built on trust. Norway's stability doesn't come from some vague national character. It is the product of a social contract maintained day after day. Here, privacy is not coldness. Strangers rarely start conversations on the bus because personal space is deeply respected, yet in small towns, people are closely bound and depend on one another. Distance and responsibility live side by side. The shape of time matters too. Working hours are contained, parental leave is standard, and public education is guaranteed. Family time isn't merely a private choice. It is backed by progressive policy and strong labor standards. Taxes here are not just an obligation. They are a recurring investment. People pay in and, in return, receive steady schools, healthcare, and infrastructure. That acceptance rests on trust. Trust that the system works and that its benefits are shared fairly. Unions and collective bargaining reinforce it, the fruit of negotiations spanning generations. When neighbors gather to fix a playground, clear a trail, paint a community hall, or run a local event, you are watching the spirit of Dugnad. The moment shared responsibility becomes something you can touch. But trust is not carved in stone. Rising costs, shrinking services in remote areas, and a widening gap between city and countryside are testing it. The feeling of being left behind, even among a few, can shake a contract that has held for decades. Those schools, ferry routes, family hours, and welfare systems are real. But they didn't appear from nowhere. They are paid for by consensus and by the vast wealth of the sea. Before oil, the sea was the only lifeline, a road, a food source, and a workplace that shaped the identity of tens of thousands. Fishing and maritime trade formed the backbone of the coast, tying isolated villages to the wider world. Follow a catch of stray cod and you see that link. The boat leaves in the dark, the crew labors at sea, and the fish are sorted and preserved at once. Some goes to processing plants, some is rushed onto trucks and ocean-going ships. A fish is never just food, it is the livelihood of the crew, the dock workers, the plant hands, and the traders. The sea doesn't only surround the village, it connects it to the global economy. The food is a record of survival too. Dried, smoked, and chilled fish are not just dishes but preservation techniques, born from the need to stockpile before winter and outlast distance. Every meal remembers how people adapted to nature. Offshore oil and gas arrived in the 1960s and changed everything. The revenue funded welfare and infrastructure on a vast scale, but the real prosperity didn't rise from the seabed. It lay in a single historic choice: to turn a finite resource into a lasting asset. The Government Pension Fund Global was born, pouring most of the profits into world markets instead of spending at home a colossal savings account to secure the welfare state for generations to come. Which raises a sharp question. Is Norway rich because it found oil, or because it was patient enough not to spend everything the oil brought? Once material security is assured, Norwegians turn to a deeper question: what makes life meaningful? The answer lies not in comfort, but in connection. For Lufsliv, open-air living isn't about conquering summits. It is the simple habit of walking, skiing, or camping, treating nature as an ordinary part of daily life. Freedom here has a name: Allemannsretten, the right to roam, which lets anyone hike and camp on uncultivated land. But it is not the freedom to do as you please. It carries duties: respect the landowner, protect the ecosystem, guard the peace of others. True freedom is using shared space without ruining it. You can see this ideal in the height. For many families, a small cabin in the woods or by the sea is a lifelong goal. Many stay deliberately basic: no electricity, no running water. Here, chopping wood, fetching water, and cooking together become purposeful acts. A high-tech society retreats from its comforts to feel more fully alive. That fullness is deepened by koes far more than candles. It is the conscious choice to make time for one another. Traditional Dugnad dress and the heritage of the Sami people still carry real weight. Today's Sami are a modern community with many professions, yet they hold fast to their language and their sacred bond with the reindeer lands. But as those quiet lands turn into sites for new energy projects, a question echoes. Who has the right to decide whether a landscape serves electricity, climate goals, or a way of life thousands of years old? Loving nature is one thing, but to keep living within it, people still need roads, power, and infrastructure that never stops. Infrastructure in Norway isn't just concrete and steel, it is a living thing. Watch an ordinary ferry. On the deck stand children bound for school, commuters, trucks full of food, healthcare workers, and the elderly. The ferry doesn't just move people between cliffs, it carries the pulse of a whole community. When storms halt it, work, school, and medical visits stop with it, and isolation stops being a line. On a map, it turns heavy and real. Tunnels and bridges are a monumental effort to close the distance. The Lardal Tunnel, running 24.5 kilometers, is more than an engineering marvel. It turns a dangerous mountain crossing into a safe daily commute. Because of such links, people can choose to stay in small communities instead of crowding into cities, but the cost of maintaining them is staggering. Hurtigruten, the legendary coastal express, still runs like a steady current. Tourism has changed its face, but for dozens of towns from Bergen to Kirkenes, it remains a vital artery, delivering goods and mail every single day. Broadband has opened remote work, linking even isolated fishing villages to the digital economy, and electric ferries and cars are becoming quiet symbols of a modern age. Yet none of this can fully replace the local need for schools, healthcare, and jobs. Infrastructure connects people, but it also poses a piercing question. Can a road really hold a young person if at the end of it there is no future worth staying for? Leaving home is never easy, but for young Norwegians, it is often an unavoidable step into adulthood. When specialized study and careers cluster in cities like Oslo and Trondheim, leaving isn't a rejection of one's roots. It is the search for a wider life a small town can't quite hold. The city offers lecture halls, career networks, and freedom from a place where everyone knows your name. Yet the tie to home rarely breaks. Many still look for a way back for family, for safety, for space to raise children, for the belonging of the place that made them. But reality rarely rolls out a red carpet. A shortage of suitable professional jobs, the struggle to buy a first home, thin local services, all leave young people hesitating. According to Statistics Norway's 2026 projections, many rural municipalities face a severe aging crisis. As those aged 70 and over come to dominate, playgrounds empty, clinics strain, and small shops fight just to survive day by day. A few places have found a new anchor in immigrant residents who bring life back to classrooms and fill gaps in fishing and services. But newcomers also need jobs, housing, and above all, a genuine sense of welcome to stay for good. These communities live in the cross-currents of change. If a land is growing old, the young must be the ones to plant new life. But can a village ever truly thrive without a reason strong enough to bring them home? Norway emerges as a haunting study in contradiction. Electric cars glide along the coast, and wind turbines turn on untouched peaks while just nearby. Massive rigs pull black gold from beneath the North Sea. Oil and gas bring colossal revenue, tens of thousands of jobs, and the supply chains that keep coastal towns alive. Yet the industry collides head-on with the dream of a green nation. In May 2026 alone, the government widened licensing with 70 new exploration blocks in key waters. Stop, and thousands lose their living, and their towns wither. Continue, and how does Norway answer for its share of the climate? Renewables are no clean answer either. The Fosen case is the costly proof. Turbines raised to cut emissions cut instead into reindeer herding rights, the cultural bedrock of the Sami. Even after compensation deals in 2023 and 2024, the rift between progress and indigenous rights remains. Who decides whether the land serves electric power or a life thousands of years old? Tourism follows the same pattern. Quiet fishing villages strain under swelling crowds as homes turn into short-term rentals, pushing prices up and locals out. And as climate change brings heavier rain and more landslides, infrastructure built for an older climate must fight to keep up. Norway's people aren't choosing between right and wrong. They face many things that are all right, yet cannot all be protected at once. Jobs, climate, indigenous heritage, peace, prosperity. They know there is no keeping everything without a trade-off. That balance never holds on its own. It must be renegotiated and paid for, through hard effort every single day. The last ferry of the day cuts through the waves and returns to the dock. Workers step off into the warm house lights glowing through the dark. In a small kitchen, a family gathers for dinner, where old stories are told again and tomorrow's plans take shape. They come back after long journeys, not because this place is free of hardship, but because they have chosen to hold on to what is theirs. Norway cannot erase the harshness of its geography, nor stop the tides of time. It can only build ferries to cross the water, tunnels to cut through the rock, and welfare systems to soften the risk for every person. It builds communities to face the endless winters, and institutions to carry that responsibility to generations still to come. Prosperity here is no natural gift. It is the fruit of relentless effort. Norwegians know a peaceful life is never won by fleeing reality. It has to be built, negotiated, and sometimes traded away across generations. Perhaps that is why the ferry still crosses the fjord every single day. Not to erase the distance, but to remind us that distance only becomes true isolation when people stop finding ways to reach each other. Home is not only where we are born, but where we choose to stay together, keeping the lights in the windows from ever going out. If you want to keep exploring how people build their lives in the most remote and unforgiving corners of the world, join us on the next journey.